We at the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast are saddened by the wildfires that have enveloped the Los Angeles region. We extend our sincere sympathies to those that have lost family members in the fires. We'd like to extend a thank you to the firefighters, the volunteer workers, and all those nonprofit organizations that have stepped up to help those that are homeless. We thank you. Our podcast is here to share knowledge as Los Angeles moves forward with adapting and creating safer environments for the future. Our hearts go out to all of you from all of us here at the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast. Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Eva Monheim.
And I'm Hal Rosner. We are both certified arborists through the International Society of Arboriculture. The purpose of our podcast is to encourage tree planting and proper tree care for our urban forests, which include neighborhoods, parks, and other open spaces.
We will also cover a myriad of tree topics, including the important role trees play in relationship to the climate crisis. Thank you for joining us. The Plant a Trillion Trees podcast is happy to announce that we have won 2 Garden Communicator International Silver Laurel Medal Awards for Best Podcast and Best Podcast Episode. We've also won a Garden Communicators International Gold Laurel Medal Award for a Best Podcast Episode. We'd like to thank Garden Communicators for their recognition.
Verdant Earth Educators provides dynamic in-person training and online learning opportunities for environmental and horticultural businesses. Owned by ISA-certified arborists and former university faculty, the Verdant Earth Educator team provides consultations on tree care and recommends climate-resilient opportunities for your valued green spaces. Verdant Earth Educators is all about seeding knowledge for success. Find Verdant Earth Educators at verdanteartheducators.com.
Monheim Microphones designs and handcrafts top-tier studio microphones and preamps right here in the United States in Hollywood, California. Their incredible line of innovative microphones and designs are used around the world by everyone from podcasters to top-charting record producers and singers. Monheim Microphones, unparalleled excellence. MonheimMicrophones.com. The Urban Wood Network gives people strength in numbers and a collective voice to showcase the growing environmental impact of an industry like urban wood utilization. This is really critical in a world where resource recovery and carbon storage benefits can go a long way to meet the needs of climate sustainability goals of cities, businesses, and consumers. Contact us at urbanwoodnetwork.org. This podcast is being recorded on November 29th, 2024. Kevin Zuidervliet is the head propagator at Octoraro Native Plant Nursery in Kirkwood, Pennsylvania. His diverse professional experience and passion for horticulture began while traveling and working on organic farms in Australia and New Zealand. He leveraged his skills in an AmeriCorps VISTA position managing a community garden. Kevin continued to hone his plant knowledge at Shaffer Landscapes in Middleburg, Pennsylvania, before earning a place in the Professional Horticulture Program at Longwood Gardens in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. At Longwood, he gained in-depth experience in woody plant propagation and management, later transitioning to a full nursery horticulturalist role. Kevin has come full circle at Octoraro, where he is using his skill sets to create regional plant palettes for designers, ecologists, and others in the industry to maintain, enhance, and recreate lost habitats in the region. Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast, Kevin. We're delighted that you could be with us today.
I'm excited to be here, Eva and Hal.
So tell us a little bit about your background. I have to confess that I do know you from Longwood Gardens as a former student, But you have a really extensive background. So would you share that with our listeners?
Sure. So I graduated from Susquehanna University back in 2013, and I wasn't quite sure exactly who I was, what I wanted to do. And so I took some time off to go and travel. I spent about 6 months, 3 months in Australia, 3 months in New Zealand, and I was a willing worker on organic farms, sometimes referred to as woofing. The deal was I would work 5 to 6 days a week, about 8 hours, and I would get free meals and a roof above my head. So I started my journey in Tasmania, the island on the south side of Australia. I was there for a month and I was working at a property that was making artisanal jams and chutneys. And all of a sudden I was working with my hands, I was working with food, I was harvesting produce, and this light bulb went off. I was like, this makes sense. Like, this makes a lot of sense to me, working with my own hands, producing my own food. And I just kept doing it, that for 6 months, it just kept getting reinforced that was really important for me to work with my own hands, producing food. So I came back to the United States and I didn't want to go back to college. I had enough student loan debt. Thank you very much. And so I found a program called AmeriCorps. So I joined AmeriCorps, very similar to Peace Corps, but instead of going somewhere else in the world, you stay in the United States. So I was working at the Lewisburg Community Garden at Bucknell University, and I was working with volunteers to produce cheap, organic, fresh produce for hot meal programs in the area. And it was a super rewarding experience. I learned so much, but I still didn't feel like I had enough skills to get into the workforce to be where I wanted to be. So I applied for the Professional Horticulture Program, which is where I met you, Eva. So spoiler, I did get accepted. But while I was waiting on that acceptance, there was some time to fill. So I worked at Shaffer Landscapes, which was sort of a high-end residential design build firm. They had their own nursery and they focused on woody plants. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was where my career was headed, was in this direction of woody plants and nursery production. So the Professional Horticulture Program is a 2-year plant boot camp at Longwood Gardens. And one of the best things that Longwood did for me was I learned what I didn't like. I love plants. I love so many things about plants, but I'm not really into tropicals. I'm not really into the conservatory, not so much annual plants. And then I landed at the Woody Plant Nursery at Longwood, and I did 3 months consecutively there as an elective. And I was like, this is for me. I absolutely love doing this. And then I was really fortunate. A job opened up at that nursery, at the Woody Plant Nursery at Longwood Gardens, and just really thrived there. I was propagating plants. I was growing plants in containers. That was my primary purpose there. And then an opportunity opened up at Octoraro Native Plant Nursery, which is where I currently am. I started off as a part-time seasonal. I just wanted to get into native plants, loved native plants, very passionate about it, but didn't really have the skills that I needed for native plant propagation, and slowly worked my way up through the organization to where I am today, which is the head propagator there.
That's a nice story.
That is a nice story.
It's a little winded, but it's a winding road to horticulture.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners listen to this part of the podcast pretty attentively because they're going to be an audience that might be carving out their own career path.
Right.
One thing I wanted to jump off with, because I've always had trouble pronouncing Octoraro and wondering where this strange word, you might know a little bit about the ground of it.
Sure.
In fact, go ahead. You can tell us what you know.
As I understand it, it's a local native word that has to do with muddy waters, and it's the name of the creek nearby, the Octoraro Creek. Our nursery sits up on a hill overlooking the Octoraro Creek. And the Octoraro Creek is in many ways a really good analogy for who we are and what we do. It is a pretty large, substantial creek that you could swim in portions and kayak through in certain portions. In other areas, it's very shallow, wide, but it runs through the base of our creek, and it's the lifeblood of our nursery because we actually water a lot of our plants from that creek. So the health of that water is essential to the health of our plants. And a lot of our plants, our purpose is for riparian buffer plantings. So getting planted along creeks, waterways, rivers, what have you, in the state of Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Maryland. And so that creek back 30 years ago, when we first started our business, it was a cornfield right up to the creek. And they built it out to be a ball and burlap production area, which never came to fruition, but the plants still exist today. And we collect seeds off of those plants right at the base of the creek. So the Octoraro Creek, it means many things for our organization. propagation, but it comes from that idea of muddy water, that is sustaining the land and whatnot. So that's where it comes from.
That's what I got too, Kevin, is at least the internet told me it's from the Tuscarora tribe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And their interpretation was it is covered with water.
It's covered. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah, it's a very common name in our area, but people outside of our area struggle with saying it. It's really unfortunate. It's like Kevin Zuidervliet works at Octoraro Native Plant Nursery. There's a lot of syllables, a lot of vowels to be confused.
It almost sounds like octagon, like eight-sided. That's what it kind of reminds me of.
Sure.
As an arborist, if you would indulge me, and because I have a feeling you have some great insights and opinions, why natives?
Yeah, why natives is a great question that a lot of people are asking nowadays. Native plants are a hot button issue right now that people like Doug Talmy have really brought to the forefront. I think it's been a trend that's been building since Silent Spring. When did that book come out? In the
60s.
Help me out, 60s, something like that.
Yeah, you're right.
And we've been really building that energy and groundswell for a long time. And the reason for natives is, I think of it as we have encroached and destroyed so much of our ecosystem over hundreds of years. From whenever Europeans first landed here, we've just totally ravaged our ecosystem in many, many ways. And we've evolved and changed it to the point that, at least where I live, it's mostly suburbia going right up to agriculture. And what our native area used to be is not what it is today. And we're not going to go back either. So how do we somehow strike a balance? And that's what it is to me. How do we strike a balance between we're not going back, but our ecosystem's so essential that birds, insects, pollinators, all of that comes together to form a complex system that can break down. And if it does break down, could be devastating to us as human beings, from food production to just beauty and walking and being immersed in our natural environment could go away if we're not careful. And the way that someone like Doug Talmy would explain it, a native versus a non-native. My garden at my personal home, which I've only been in here at 2 years, has been heavily planted already. And I have some non-native plants that I just absolutely love. So I've got a dwarf ginkgo. The way that our native ecosystem looks at the dwarf ginkgo is it's essentially a statue. There's not much value to it. It's almost could be stone that the native insects and bugs and squirrels and whatnot can't get anything from that plant. But our native plants are a buffet of food items for songbirds eating caterpillars, for pollinators that are eating the nectar and building on all of those layers. So there's the answer for sort of the backyard home grower to say we can support our native ecosystem with native plants. But more importantly for our business is the riparian buffer plantings, which heal our waterways. So preventing sediment and erosion getting into the streams, which then accumulate down in our bays like the Chesapeake Bay. The best thing you can do to prevent that sediment and from chemicals and manure getting in there is native plants that are, I'm going to say, designed for that purpose, that they have evolved to grow along these systems and have their roots work together to prevent runoff, sedimentation, things of that purpose. So why native plants? There's a lot of reasons, and it depends on who you are and why you're coming at whatever problem it is. If you're coming at it as a climate change warrior, that you're saying, hey, climate change is a real problem, native trees are really, really great at so many things that solve that problem. So there's a lot of ways to approach that question. I think I've touched on just a few of them, but native plants are really, really important now more than ever.
What's really interesting, I was at a conference, I was doing a talk just the other week, and there was somebody that was talking about the amount of mills that were here in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, New York. Mm-hmm. And the mills actually created a lot of our issues that we have now. Yep. And the walls that were made to make these mills work and the devastation that they did to our ecosystem was how the riparian restoration project started in southeastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
That's how a lot of people jumped onto the native bandwagon, because of knowing that we needed natives along our streams to do exactly what you were talking about. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was involved with it, it was hard to find a native plant anywhere. You couldn't find it. Even when we had our landscape company, I had to send to California and the West Coast for our natives here in the East. It was crazy.
Well, that's why Octoraro got started. Was in 1990, Mark Gutshaw had started another business called Land Studies, which is sort of a sister company. They do a lot of what you're describing is the installation projects. Yeah. And they're going, the government says I have to use a native plant. I want to use a native plant, but I can't find any. So he said, there's a hole, and I'm going to start a nursery that is going to provide those plants. So 1990, Octoraro, I think it was Wetland Nursery was born, and it was all wetland plants. So it was all aquatic plants. Now we don't grow any herbaceous plants, not aquatics or anything like that. We only grow straight species, native trees and shrubs. And so that's just evolved over the 30 years that we've been there. But that demand that you're talking about in the late 80s, early 90s, that's why Octoraro got started.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. And I was impressed. First of all, I have to tell you, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on our podcast was visiting Octoraro and seeing how you were managing your seed collection and seed planting, your poly houses that you had all your different plants in, and the beautiful poly house that you're sitting in front of right now with, and viewers can't see it, but he's got hydrangea arborescens in there, and he's got a whole host of other plants that are native. And that to me was really exciting. And I thought, wow, we need to have Kevin on, because it's not only the trees, but it's also the shrubs that go underneath them that we need to be talking about too, because that creates the whole plant community. And that's what you seem to be, a community kind of person. You're collecting and creating communities around the region, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, I've started to describe our seed collection as like a community first approach. It's not how I thought about it when we first started this, but it's evolved to become sort of community focused, because we collect as much of our own seed as possible. We do rely on seed brokers and seed companies, and we can talk about that in more detail, how we work with them, but we gather as much as we possibly can from our immediate area. So we talk about working between the two rivers. We work between the Susquehanna River and the Delaware River. That's kind of our collection area, because if we go any further than that, it just becomes not profitable for us, because it's just too far to drive to pay someone to go somewhere that maybe there isn't any seed. Like maybe it was a bad drought and you just wasted 3 hours of driving time. So we try to collect really, really local, which is, a business decision, but it's also an ethical decision that we want to provide the most localized eco-type seed as possible. And we work with private landowners. We work with universities. We work with Swarthmore, Scott Arboretum, work with Lincoln University. We work with Longwood Gardens, Mount Cuba Center. We work with local nurseries that have rowed out Magnolia virginiana. It's just a ball and burlap nursery that has huge tree, or, not huge, but their trees are lined out that you can just pick the seeds as you're walking on the row. How easy does that get? So we work with Jim Plyler at National Landscapes, the Wells brothers at Watercrest Farms. So we work with all these different parties to assemble our arsenal of seeds. And we also started working with some independent collectors. So Zach Elfers being one of them, a couple other people that are collecting seed, or say, hey, my backyard's got a giant yellow buckeye. And they contact us and say, hey, I've got X seed. And it's just become this really cool network of people, places, just really, really interesting how we've gotten to where we are. And it's really exciting to see where we're going to go. And it's all tracked. We have geolocations on a private Google Maps that we can go back to individual trees and know, hey, that was a really, really good white oak on this road. And then you go there the next year and it might not be, because of the nature of oak trees. But that's kind of what we've been building over time for how we collect our own seed. It's been a really fun journey over the past couple of years.
Can you walk us through the process? Perhaps you're going to get a call and have an opportunity to collect seed from a native, but maybe a native that you're not completely familiar with, or a native that's somewhat rare. all of a sudden you have a nice stash of seed. How do you go about the due diligence of knowing that you're going to propagate it so that you have good germination?
Yeah, so like a good example of this is like, let's talk about a particular plant, Dirca palustris, which is leatherwood. Fairly unusual plant. Not a whole lot of people grow it. I think it's desirable. I think it's a great plant, but it's not very much in the trade. And I am a plant person looking for rare and unusual plants at every turn. So I found out about this plant. Some people were speccing it in designs, and I was like, we need to start growing this thing. So it's a puzzle right from the beginning. Where do you get the seed? You know, like nobody's growing it because nobody can get the seed. So how do I get the seed? So this is what I do in the winter months is I start tracking down where these plants are growing. I'm very fortunate. My wife is the conservation propagator at Mount Cuba Center. So a lot of times my first phone call is, hey, Claire, can you look on Iris, right, their database and see if you have any Dirca palustris? And she goes, yeah, not only do we have that, we have propagation protocols. So
wow.
Now Cuba has been working on producing propagation protocols that I can then also follow. So that's a really, really great relationship that I have with my own wife.
It's helpful.
So we get rare seeds from places like Mount Cuba Center, but there's also people that I tap, like Dale Hendricks, who was the founder of North Creek Nursery. He's someone that we've gotten to know. You know, there's native plant nuts out there, which I'm one of them. We all congregate together and we all talk. And hey, I'm looking for Viburnum acerifolium, maple leaf viburnum. And he goes, oh yeah, I was at Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve and they had a great stand of it. Okay, that's my next phone call. Can I talk to Bowman's Hill? Will they let me collect? You know, that's always the next question. Will you let us collect? Oh, you're not going to let us collect, or you're a little worried about it? Well, here's our seed collection agreement. Here's what says we're going to collect ethically. Here's what it says about how we'll return, you know, we'll pay you for the seed we get, or we'll give you plants in return from that seed batch, you know? So we've developed relationships that we can ask those quirky questions of like, hey, Dale, have you seen X, Y, and Z recently? They say, yes, we have. And then the next step is the propagation part, right? And Tony Avent down at Plant Delight says to know a plant is to kill it 3 times. So to know a plant is to fail at propagating it 3 or 4 times too. You know, sometimes you get lucky right off the bat. You know, there are some good resources out there. We have a plant propagation book by Hartman, Davies, Kester, and Geneve that we reference a lot. Michael Durr's books are great.
Yeah.
There's a couple of websites, Sheffield's Seeds, Sheffields.com. They have a lot of really good resources on individual plants that they sell because they're selling you seeds and they want you to be successful. So they want you to keep coming back. So they give you good information. So we use seed websites and we talk to other growers too. We've got great relationships with who people would normally call our competition. We talk to each other and trade information. Hey, have you grown this? How do you do your warm strat? How do you do these things? So it's, you know, and you go to conferences and you keep yourself sharp and all of that. So that's kind of how we handle those sorts of situations.
And then you actually presented those conferences too.
Yeah, I was able to present at IPPS this past year, the International Plant Propagator Society. I've talked at my alma mater at Susquehanna University. So yeah, I do some presentations on those topics from time to time, which is a lot of fun. I love being invited to talk.
You know, when I get really excited when I see something that I haven't seen or it's new to me, and I know exactly where they are because if seed is ever needed, I can tell you, but Dirca is at Jenkins Arboretum.
Oh, okay.
Jenkins has some along the stream. And, you know, another place, I have to tell you this, Viburnum acerifolium up along the Raritan Canal, right on the other side of Delaware River in New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
North of, I forget the name of the town, but it's really funny because I put those things in my head because as a woody plant teacher, I always try to think, okay, where can I get a sample or what could I see? And I think you as a seed person, it's pretty darn amazing what you must have in your head when you go walking or you travel to some other place outside of your region and you see something that is from your region and you think, oh my gosh, here's another seed source.
Yeah, the thing about having this stuff in our head is really dangerous. And I think our industry has really not been good about putting stuff down on paper and communicating that knowledge to the next generation. That a lot of people, there's some key people in our industry that have amassed so much information and they're sharing it. But there's these other people that are just like, I'm a plant person. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to be with my plants. And they're the ones that have the most knowledge. So we're, as an organization at Octoraro, we are pretty strict about writing stuff down. We have our own internal documents. We don't really share them with other people. It's our own information, but we have an eye to passing this information down within our organization, that if somebody were to come in that was new, that we needed to get them up to speed really quickly, I don't need to sit down with them for a year. They can read this information, or they can reference information that we've learned, that this is the protocol for how we do X, Y, or Z. Standard operating procedures is a really boring idea, but it's a really important one, that we preserve information and pass it down to the next generation, the next person. So yeah, when I'm out in the wild, so to speak, camping or hiking or whatever, my brain's going a million miles an hour looking at plant communities and, oh, that grows with this grows with that, and then to bring it back and distill it down to something important and information that can be used and spread. We write it down. It's all in the cloud. It's shared within our company. And so it's important information that has to be stored and kept alive.
So it's important that you have like this library of information.
Yeah,
which,
we have a database.
People don't think about plants as being in a library on a database somewhere, but it has to be that way because, like you said, it can get lost in time.
Absolutely.
And the other thing too is that maybe something was there and it was recorded, but it's not there now. So it might be something that you want to encourage to bring back to an area. Is that something that you do?
It's tricky. I think our job is to offer as many paint colors to the artist as possible.
Right.
And then it's up to them to choose what color they're going to paint with, right?
Gotcha.
So when I first started Octoraro, I kind of laid a challenge out there for one of the co-owners, Jim McKenzie. I said, we got to grow some more diversity. Like we have great plants, and I was proud to just start working there. But I sort of said, we got to do some more, and that's why the background image that nobody can see is really important. We've got Magnolia macrophylla, Comptonia peregrina, and Hydrangea arborescens, which we didn't grow when I first arrived. And it's about offering a higher level of diversity that people can choose to grow plants, because diversity is really the answer as we go into climate crises, we go into droughts, we go, resiliency is built in diversity. And whether that's diversity of species, diversity of the genetics in a seed lot, that's the key to our future success, I think. And if we're not providing all of the options to all of our customers, we're not going to have a good shot at success. Something's going to come in that we don't know exists. Ash was one of our biggest sellers.
Yeah.
It was one of our biggest sellers.
Great example.
And overnight, that was gone. It was like we used to sell 10 to 15,000 seedlings of green ash a year. It's just gone. Beech, now threatened, so what are we going to replace that with? We have to be thinking about those things. And I am, what's going to be the next beech tree? Is our woods, is it all going to be tulip poplar? Like that, what's going to happen when tulip poplar gets something? We need to be thinking outside of the box of what we're going to be providing. You talked about the importance of layers, right? You have the canopy of the shade tree and then the understory of the shrubs, but there's another middle layer that like Magnolia tripetala. Who's growing that? We should be growing that. That's a middle layer that's really important.
Absolutely.
A pollinator tree, that's native to, right down the road from us, it's native. Magnolia macrophylla, which is in the image behind me, is much southern species, but we have its close relative that's native to the serpentine barrens nearby.
I'll never forget the first time I saw a whole stand of tripetala, and I was like, what? This is crazy. Somebody directed me there. One of the foresters directed me there. He said, go check out our tripetala stand over and such. And I was like, oh my gosh. But I took a whole group of students there, and they were all like standing there. There was not a sound out of anybody's mouth when we got there. And it's those kind of moments that you think, okay, this is something that needs to be planted more often.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I like the fact when we were visiting, not only did you talk about your libraries online, your seed sheets, but also how you collect. I loved your little vacuum cleaner for acorns. Oh my gosh. I think every child would love one of those to help you pick up acorns.
Yeah. As we've gotten into as I've gotten into seed collecting, we are accumulating these really specialized tools to do the job. And what you're talking about is this company out of Florida started developing this product that people were using just to pick up like acorns in their backyard that they thought of as a nuisance. I don't want these acorns, they're a tripping hazard. The squirrels are everywhere. I hate these acorns. And then people like me got a hold of it and was like, this is the best thing in the world. Like I can pick up hundreds of pounds of acorns in a couple minutes walking along and it'll just scoop them right up for me. But then the next part of that we didn't really get to demonstrate to you, Eva, is how we clean the seed.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with 800 pounds of rotting pawpaw? How do you clean that? And that was a question we were asking ourselves when we were handed it from Horn Farm Center. They handed us, I think it was 200 pounds of rotting pawpaw. And we're like, how do we get the
rats
out?
Rats. Raccoons.
So yeah, we need to train some skilled rats to eat the just don't touch the seed,
Yeah.
We started off by taking our boots off and stomping it like it was grapes. That's cool. That's how we started. And since then, we've bought some seed cleaning machines. The Dibvig has revolutionized our seed cleaning. It's a very simple machine, but it's specialized to our industry. You can set a dial for the height and it allows the pulp out one side and the seed comes out the other. I mean, a process that used to take us hours and was very laborious, took a lot of water, like just washing the fruit off. We just throw these rotting pawpaws in and, in a couple of minutes, we'll have tens of pounds of seed, which is what we want. We don't want 200 pounds of rotting pawpaw. We want tens of pounds of really good, high quality seed. There are so many stages of points that could be failure for producing a native plant from seed. Right off the bat, the seed didn't set because of too much rain, because of drought. Before you even got to it, there could be a failure. You could have messed up cleaning it and nicked the seeds. Now you can't store it. Maybe you left it in the fridge too long and you stratified it wrong. And now that's bad. Each step is just a place where you could potentially fail. And it's almost like a miracle to me that we're able to produce as many plants as possible, because it can be a real challenge to get all of these processes right to the point where a plant comes out the other end.
Yeah, and we were talking with Steve Kiskela from British Columbia.
Yeah.
And he's one of the largest tree growers in the world. He has 14 million trees he grows a year, something like that. And he was telling us that they have storage where they store their seed. And some of their seed is like 65 years old. And I said, well, why would you store it for that long? And he goes, he said, because we like to introduce old phenotypes that might not be around anymore. And we put that back into the system. And he said that to create a greater diversity. And I thought, wow, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But they could store these orthodox seeds, what they call orthodox seeds, instead of recalcitrant, which you really have to have a plant to pick the seeds off of. And he said they can store for 100 years without any problem if you have the right storage and you have the right facilities and techniques. As you're talking about, Kevin, having the right technique is critical for getting good growth later down the line.
Yeah, every step you can be a perfectionist and really dial it in and get it right. And we grow about 150 different species. So each species is a little different. I mean, each cornice is a little different from, some of them want warm strat, some want cold strat. And it's probably why they've gotten split out by the botanists between Suida and Benthamidia. We're a little old school. We haven't quite adopted those names yet. But it's really interesting to learn all the different nuances that each of these plants grow. And something to add to that about storing the seeds, we actually will stratify seeds way longer than what's recommended. So something like black gum, they'll recommend 60 to 90 days cold stratification, cold moist stratification. And some of the seed, we won't use all of it. And it's like, well, we're going to throw it out? Like, why would we throw it out? So we'll dip our hands into that bag, do a test batch next year, and it's like totally fine. And it's had like over a year's worth rather than 2 or 3 months worth, and it's still okay. Eventually, it does go bad, but it impressed me how far you can push that. These things are suggestions. They're living things. A winter could be really long and those seeds stay on the ground longer than 60 to 90 days. They don't go, it's been 90 days. That's it. So in the fridge, they're the same way. It's guidelines. That's why horticulture, we describe it as an art and a science of plants. It really, really is. And propagation is the same. It's an art and a science. There's a lot of art that goes into what we do.
Just jumping back to pawpaw and maybe in general, since the southeastern Pennsylvania coming out of a pretty good drought, 60 plus days. How did you see on site? And by that, I mean in actual creek beds. Did you note that the riparian plants continued to perform pretty well despite some drought conditions?
So on our riparian buffer down at the creek where we actually have our nursery, the plants we're largely unaffected. Where we are stays really, really wet. So even when it's dry out, it's still pretty wet. We planted some things. So we're starting to plant our own seed orchard in a part of that cornfield that was just mowed grass. So we're starting to plant our own seed orchard, and we had to water. We were watering those plants because it was like we had done a lot of work to plant those plants and get them in deer cages and all of that. So we were down there, I don't know, once every 10 days, once every 2 weeks or something like that to make sure those plants were thriving. What we did see, a lot of people say they got a grant and then they said, okay, I'm going to go plant 500 trees on this creek or whatever on this date. And they come to us, they place their order for the future, which is very common. And they say, in October, I'm going to be planting X, Y, and Z. October comes around and we've been in this drought for 60 days. And they go, I can't get a shovel in the ground, let alone expect a plant to live. Because most places that people are planting our plants don't have a hose. They don't ever see the end of a hose. They're lucky if somebody comes back and weed whacks around the base of the tree. So these plants have to thrive in their environment. And if they're getting planted during a drought, you're setting up for failure. So a lot of people were pushing their orders. So we had this inundation of, I'm ready for my plants now because it rained, so people were putting plants in the ground really late. And that's sort of one of the things that is hard in our industry is working with these natural phenomenons that people are, I want my plants now. Oh, wait, it's snowing. I didn't expect snow now, or the ground froze. Oh, now the ground's thawed, So we just have to work with people and come to them where they're at. And the weather really affects us. One of our wells went dry during this latest drought, and we rely on that well, and it made our lives really, really difficult for a little while. So we are not immune to any of the natural phenomena that's going on, and the droughts have made it really quite tricky for sure.
Wow. We heard, I've been listening about the drought, and people are talking about, well, how much is going to survive after the drought? And I was doing a class on drought for a group down at Penn, and I said to them, drought comes this year, but you've got to make sure that you're on top of it for the next 2 or 3 years and look to see what kind of damage occurs in the tree or shrub after the fact.
Right.
Some of the plants weren't on irrigation, and I was really surprised, but you could see the damage already, and you can't prune during a drought.
Right. There's a lot you can't do during a drought, right? Other than wait and worry.
Yeah, exactly.
Water.
Exactly.
Water.
One of the things we wanted to make sure we spoke with you about today, Kevin, is that hotbed topic of provenance and your thoughts on that. Anytime you go to a conference or engage with other horticulture people, it can get people riled up. And I'd love to hear your take on that.
Yeah, it can really get people riled up. There's a local nursery who, for the purpose of the story, will remain unnamed, but they are hardcore. They are local ecotype. I mean, they only grow stuff that they can get from their own meadow. Like, that's how hardcore they are about it. But they found a sterile variety of a plant that basically pollinators can't interact with. And they said, this is a great plant for ornamental value. And they went and licensed it and started growing it. And certain people stopped buying from them because they introduced a plant to ornamental horticulture. They said, that's not in congruence with your belief system. It's like, that's hardcore. That's pretty hardcore. People will, if they find out you land on the wrong side of the provenance spectrum, just stop buying from you outright. It can be really contentious. And it's been something our industry, as I understand it, has been talking about for decades. And we're not at the bottom of we haven't arrived at an answer. We're still asking questions. And I think it's important to ask the question of how important is provenance, especially in a world that we know our environment's evolving, that we're getting longer droughts, we're getting colder winters, we're getting hotter summers. And it depends where you are. Sometimes all of that's happening. Sometimes certain places are, it just depends. So if we know things are more or less getting warmer, why are we growing plants from the same region? Why not bring plants from a more southern locale? A lot of people are making that argument. That's not our stance, at least not yet. There are certain plants that we've had to stop growing, like aspens, that just refuse to grow in our hot, humid summers in a pot anymore. They just won't. And then there's certain plants that we couldn't overwinter 30 years ago that are getting specced out regularly, like Quercus phillips, willow oak. That's something that we wouldn't be able to overwinter in a pot 30 years ago, but now it's a pretty commonly specced out plant. So there is some migration happening. Our philosophy is that plants are resilient. They have gone through climate change before. This is not new to them. Some of our plants are thousands, millennia old. And we think that growing plants from our ecoregion, the Mid-Atlantic region, from seeds that have that stored genetic knowledge will continue to thrive in our ecoregion. There are some species that we can get into the nitty-gritty, like aspen that I brought up, probably not going to grow super well at the southern tier of its region anymore. But then there's other species like red maple that are native from Georgia to Maine. And I just don't believe that the seed we picked off of the tree in the Mid-Atlantic region now won't have genetic resilience to climate change. We still feel that it's important for us to define our area and let customers know you're getting a Mid-Atlantic seed source. And then they can make the decision whether or not they want a southern seed source. If they want to go down to Tennessee and order a plant from Tennessee, like McMinnville, or they want to go down to Georgia, they can make that decision. But it's important for us to communicate to customers our philosophy and what they're getting from us. So that's kind of where we stand on the provenance issue as an organization. It's something that should still be thought about and discussed. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, transparency is what's needed in our industry so people can make informed decisions that are right for them.
Why do you think there's a orthodox response with this topic? On the most conservative interpretation of provenance, what are people thinking?
Yeah, the people that I find to be the most extreme on this topic are the ones that want to do the most good and are really, really well-informed people that will say things like, well, our native blank caterpillar evolved in this region with this plant. And its mouthparts are so unique that if you bring a plant from another ecoregion, even though it's the same species, it can't interact with it, and that could be true for certain orchids, certain really rare and individual plants, like that ecotype could really, really matter. And then the people that are really, really scientifically minded are more into this idea of plant migration, plants coming up from the south and assisted migration. And should we be sourcing from southern species to make a more resilient canopy? Now Cuba's doing a trial or an experiment, a canopy resiliency experiment, where they're testing a northern variety of black gum versus a southern variety of black gum. And they're going to be tracking that for 100 years and seeing which survives better. And those are questions that need to be answered, and we need to ask those questions. But places like that are really interesting because they want nurseries to grow both ecotypes. So they're asking us, hey, will you grow a southern ecotype and a northern ecotype and track those through our pipeline and then hand them to us, And our answer is no, we do Mid-Atlantic plants. So what's happening is they order some from the south and some from the north, and then they keep track of them. But the hardline response, why does that happen? Oh, gosh, why does that happen anywhere?
Yeah.
It gets into, it's almost like a zeal that people have, that they start reading books and going to talks and get whipped up into a froth, And I think that those people tend to, once they get in the industry, temper a little bit, realize the reality of seed. Where do you get these local ecotype seeds? Is it ethical to remove some of these seeds from that local region that's threatened? Maybe go somewhere where those seeds aren't threatened. It's a really complex topic that everyone needs to approach on their own level and find the right course for them.
I remember what we had here over 40 years ago. We had a landscaping company, and what doesn't exist anymore. And I could go down a whole list of stuff that doesn't exist here or is struggling to exist here. And I also think that, we talk about ecotypes, but we have someone else who's dispersing besides us, and that's birds and other animals. So they're constantly dispersing. So if a bird's down in maybe in Virginia, North Carolina, is eating the American holly, we'll bring up the seed someplace in Massachusetts when it lands. It's going to be a different ecotype. It's going to be totally different. And does it survive up there?
Sure.
It may not. But I think that the animal movement has been constricted so much by our roadways that a lot of our terrestrial animals can't move up and down as freely because they get killed on the roadway. Mm-hmm. And it's true that they're doing projects on the West Coast where they're building these bridges that animals can cross over so they continue to migrate, so they can actually carry the seed. That doesn't happen here anymore. I mean, we get too many killed animals that are not dispersing their seed, if that makes any sense.
Right. And humans are a great job at moving plants around, as we've proven in ornamental horticulture for a long time.
Exactly.
And we still do it today. Native plants are moving around up and down the coast. my cry for diversity is answered by bringing some species that are more southern north. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Time will tell. And certain plants like bottlebrush buckeye, which I think was like plant of the year for Delaware Landscape and Nursery Association, excellent ornamental value, but I question its ecological value. There's not a lot that is really dependent on bottlebrush buckeye. Doug Talmy will say the worst native plant is a yellowwood. Why is that? Because there's not a lot that depends on a yellowwood, So when you're talking about powerhouses in our ecosystem and migrating plants and all of that, you got to really take a hard look at what we're bringing and what we're moving. And there are certain native plants that people will refer to as invasive, I don't think there's such a thing as a native invasive plant. That seems like an oxymoron to me, but there's certainly native plants that will thrive in a certain environment and not really give back to that environment as much as a complex ecosystem without just a monoculture of sweet gum or something more aggressive like that.
Right. And I think the other thing too is I think that sometimes we forget that not all plants are made for insects, and some plants are made for us to have better structure in our soil. And I know that this is an invasive plant, but what grows in the city is Paulownia, and it's lime-based, and all the concrete, well, guess what? It likes lime soils. It prefers lime over acid soils. And it drops these big, huge leaves that provide organic material. But one of its main purposes is to draw up water from down below. And it could have a long, long root system. So they use it as an indicator plant in the city of Philadelphia for takedowns. So if there's a Paulownia growing in the chimney, it's in the basement, the root's in the basement, pulling up water. So that particular tree is actually a pump for everybody else around it. So it'll actually share its resources. And a lot of times people don't realize that. And I do understand the insect connection, but I don't think we understand enough about the structural soil structure and what some of the plants do underground,
You can take that argument like even a step further. One of our large customers, Stroudwater Research.
Oh, yeah.
And they do some really excellent work.
Absolutely.
And one of the things they were looking at a number of years ago, I don't know what they're still doing with it, but they were looking at the chemical compounds that accumulate on a raindrop as it falls down a tree's trunk. And what does that do to waterways? When they told me that, I was like, I never even would have thought about it. We're just happy to get canopy cover over a waterway, let alone looking at molecular level chemistry of, that's really important work. And I'm glad that people like that are 5 steps ahead, because we're going to be asking that question at some point. Is a black gum more efficient or better for water microbes than, that's such a complex question to be asking and studying. And they were capturing raindrops as they fell down the trunk of a tree to study them. You think about like the pine barrens. The water is what color? It's brown because of the tannins. And that has to have some effect, right, on that ecosystem. It has to. I don't know what it is, but it's clearly important. And if we bring in other species that aren't providing those tannins, well, then what happens to the water? It turns clear and it's beautiful to swim in, but it's probably bad for something. There's a reason for all of that.
That dark water, Yeah,
you can really get into minuscule, is this plant doing good for the soil? Is it doing good for the water? There's a saying we have in our industry, trout grows on trees. I don't know if you've ever heard that before.
Absolutely.
Good water is from good trees. Shaded, deep, clean, clear water is what trout need to survive. So if you don't have that, no trout, no trees, no trout. So trout, grow on trees.
Yeah, I remember living up in central Pennsylvania at Penn State. We used to have one of the best trout fishing in the area.
Yeah, and, Penn's Creek.
What was that?
Penn's Creek. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to tell you something. People from all over the world would come there to fish, and it was the coolest place, and literally cool.
Yeah.
In the summertime, and even in the heat.
One thing I noticed on the website, Kevin, is Octoraro's relationship with a pretty significant list of nonprofits that you do custom growing for. Could you talk about that sector of your business and how you go, or I guess they find you sometimes? Or?
Yeah, nonprofits, and I'm going to call them this is not a technical term, but pseudo-government organizations, nonprofits that get a lot of money from governmental grants and things like that. They are a huge part of our customer base, specifically places like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. We've had a substantial contract with them. These organizations largely are based around clean water. and wanting to clean up our waterways for one reason or another. Most of them are concerned about the Chesapeake Bay, which is one of our largest estuaries in the United States. And from that estuary, most of the water that goes into that, the watershed, is in Pennsylvania. I think New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania feed into it, but the bulk of that watershed is here in Pennsylvania. So these nonprofits are looking at ways to clean up the water. And one of the most efficient, cheapest ways you can do that is by planting trees along waterways. So they often have a multi-pronged approach that they're doing. Oysters, they're growing out oysters and what's reforesting oysters? I don't know what that term is, but they're putting oysters out into waterways. They're educating people. They're lobbying lawmakers. And then they're also planting trees. And we get that benefit from them. And it's competitive. We're not the only nursery out there seeking their business, and we have to compete for these contracts. Oftentimes, what's the bigger issue is we can't fulfill their need. That they say, hey, we want 500,000 plants a year. And we're like, that's great. We only grow a total of 350,000 plants a year. So how can we structure this in a way that we can still have other customers but get you a lot of plants? And that is a huge issue, I know, on the East Coast, that there's not enough plants. There's not enough native nurseries to provide for these challenges we are facing. And these proposals that these nonprofits, these government agencies will say something like, we're going to plant 10 million trees. And we kind of sit there and laugh a little bit and go, where are you getting them? Honestly, where are you getting them from? Because if there's not many native plant growers out there, and there's not enough of us, and we're not putting enough out there. So really what they should be asking themselves is that question first, and saying, how do we get more horticulturalists into the industry? How do we make more people doing this as a profitable business? How can we invigorate the native plant nursery sector so that we have the plants to plant? They're putting the cart before the horse here and saying, we're going to plant all these plants. Well, back up and say, where are you getting them first? Where are you getting the seed from? So maybe you got to go that far back and start invigorating the seed industry. I mean, some of our seed providers, the companies, were on the verge of going under not so long ago because of familial ties that were breaking down. And like Lovelace Seed is a huge provider, not in our eco-region, but out in Missouri. And they were on the verge of going under. And that would have been a real problem for native plant growers that relied on them in that region. So nonprofits are a really, really big deal in our industry. The Alliance for the Bay, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Stroudwater Research, they're a nonprofit, I believe, as well. And we do contracts with them. So they will approach us and say, we need, like I said, 500,000 plants, and it begins a negotiation. What can we realistically provide you in this time frame? And it becomes a relationship that we have to really cultivate and teach them when they get plants. You don't get plants in August, right? So why not? Well, you don't want to plant in August. So they may have structured it in a way that said, hey, we want 2,000 plants a month. And we're like, you want plants in January? So then you start getting the nitty-gritty details of that contract. When do you get the plants? You get them in the spring, you get them in the fall, you get this many at this time, that time. And then that structures our entire growing program to fit that customer and make sure that we hit our goals. And we have a large percent of our customers are contract grows, but then we also grow on speculation that we just think, we need 5,000 Cornus racemosa this year, and then find out, oh, maybe we needed 6,000, and that's the game you play, the speculation game. But significant nonprofits they're a big part of our business and really, really important in our industry.
Is there conversations like Octoraro needs to grow their business in terms of land acquisition?
Yeah, we get that quite a bit. We have some Octoraro groupies that really, really like the product we put out there, and we pride ourselves on that. We think we provide a premium native plant product, and people really like that. And one of the complaints we get very frequently, I hear at trade shows a lot, is we need more of your plants out there, and we want you to grow more plants. How can you grow more plants? And the short-term answer to that question is we're not going to grow more plants. We just open up a second location, a much bigger facility, much more modern. Company's 30 years old. This new location opened up in 2021. So we just expanded. And so we're kind of at capacity, and we sell at capacity. So every year we fill the entire nursery with all of our plants, and we sell all those plants. That's just the breathing in and out of the nursery that it fills up with plants, and then you send them all out into the world. And we're probably not going to be expanding for some time because we just did it. Is it something that long-term strategy we need to really think about and look at? Absolutely. And we need to be very critically looking at that. And, it's a business decision. It's something we want to do ethically, is put more plants out there, but you have to look at this, the hard facts. And that's the side I'm not really involved with. I'm the propagator, I'm the grower. I stick to the plants. But at the end of the day, if we want to expand, we're landlocked right now. We'd have to look at another location, or look at our lease. Can we expand it or, whatever. So it's an interesting question. We need more plants, but do we want to expand? Is it a prudent time to expand? Those are some soul searching things as a company we would have to really examine.
That's really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about your sand beds?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I thought they were so fascinating, Kevin. It just blew my mind.
Yeah, it's something that's very unique to our nursery. I'm pretty proud of the nurseries I have visited in my short time in horticulture. I have yet to have seen this system used anywhere else. So what it looks like is it looks like a raised bed for vegetable gardening inside a greenhouse and full of sand. Pretty simple. Pure sand, no additives. And what it is the bottom of it has heat. So there's hot water tubing that a boiler's pumping water through. And then we sow our seeds into the sand. The sand is I think it's 10 inches deep, I believe. And we sow our seeds directly into that sand. And we sow things very, very tight, on a very tight spacing. And then we harvest the plants from that sand while they're in leaf. So we are taking a plant out of the sand, bare rooting it, while it's transpiring in leaf, potting it up and babying it until it can live on its own legs. And we've produced a very technical process to do that. That involves Bioplex, which is a plant enhancer. It involves mist, making sure the leaves never dry out. Our labor force is very well trained on how to do it. But our sand beds occupy about 900 square feet of greenhouse space. So that's the size of a small apartment. So if somebody could picture a loft apartment in Manhattan that's overpriced, that's essentially what we're working with, is that square footage. And last year we produced about 42,000 oak trees out of that space. And that's the first crop rotation. After that, we do red maples, silver maples, sugar maples, river birch, and tulip pop. And from that, we probably generated another 40,000. So you can see within a year, we're producing 100, 200,000 plants, somewhere in that ballpark, year to year. It's a really, really great space for us to, this is a term I used a lot in propagation, is fail on a small scale. So we want to sprinkle seeds out in a small square footage. And if they don't germinate well, all right, well, we only failed on a very small square footprint. And if we succeed, we can expand that and really blow it out and grow a lot more. So it's a really great system, especially for low, with germination being very poor on something. So like tulip poplar, easy to sprinkle the seeds into the sand bed, and you sprinkle them very densely. So if it's like a 30% germination rate, well, if you sprinkle them densely enough, it looks like 90% germination. And then you pull them out as they germinate and pot them up into their final destination. This time of year, it's pretty funny because the sand beds are full, but they look empty. So they're full of acorns right now of our white oak group. That'll be our first crop. So they're all sitting there putting their roots out. So if you go in and dig in our sand beds, we've got probably 15, 20,000 oaks that are all these little roots coming out the bottom. And so we're just waiting on that. It's just cold. It's a weird concept people have that greenhouses always need to be a hot place that are growing plants. For us, they need to be relatively cold, but not too cold that pipes aren't breaking and we're not damaging those acorns. And they're going to stay like that until February. We'll crank the heat up in February. 6 weeks later, we'll start harvesting acorns out of there. As soon as we harvest one, we plant more acorns. So it's a challenge to us. How many times can we flip those sand beds to get as many plants out of there as possible? It's a really unique system that I don't see a lot of people using, but it's a combination of heat and moisture and mist and plant enhancers and a really talented labor force that's digging the plants without damaging the root systems. But we produce a lot of plants through that system.
Kind of reminds me of supermarkets. The faster you get it on the shelf and off the shelf, the better. And the
Absolutely.
more money you make per square foot. So that's what you're telling us. And I think that that's really fascinating.
Yeah, our propagation facility is relatively small for the size of the nursery we have. And we pump a lot of plants through that space. And that's how we look at it is, how fast can we get this plant on the bench and then off of the bench and, in and out, in and out, in and out. The faster we can get it off the bench and pot it up into its next size, the faster we have a saleable product and on it goes.
I think it was your nursery that, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were saying the less you handle it, the better, because every time you handle it, you're spending more money. Mm-hmm. So wherever you put it, it stays. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So that is the way we look at it. We don't want to handle things twice. So planning is paramount to success. We want to crop plan where we're like, okay, we're going to sow this into this tray and it's going to sit there until it's ready to get bumped up to its next size, potted up. And then once it gets potted, it gets it sat somewhere where it's going to stay for its entire growing season. And ideally, if we do our job right, it goes from being potted up to its growing space onto a truck to the customer. And that's all the times we touch it. Is that reality? Not all the time, right? Sometimes you got to reorganize things and move things around. Sometimes you put something somewhere you thought was a good spot for it, and now it's suffering and you can't let the plant die. But I'd say the bulk of the time, where we put plants is where they stay for the season. And this time of year is probably when we handle plants the most because two things are happening. We're still shipping plants. Well, Thanksgiving's in the rearview mirror, but prior to Thanksgiving, we were still shipping plants. And we started putting plants away for the winter. And we know certain plants are sold, but they're not sold till spring. So we have to put them away in greenhouses, cover them up, keep them safe for the winter. So plants are getting moved around a lot. But again, the goal is to just not handle them more than you have to. So we'll put plants away in a strategic place that we can ship them very quickly. We're not going to put this plant that we know is sold for March 1st in the back of the nursery. We're going to put that right at the front of the nursery so we can back that truck right up to it and get it out the door. It's just planning. All summer we're planning. All winter we're planning. So even in those down times, I thought the nursery industry, I would get my summers and winters off. I was excited to go surfing and skiing. And I don't get to do either of those tasks. We're in meetings, we're planning, we're scheming, we're plotting, we're just thinking about how can we do it better next year and, all of those things. And it's really important because the less you handle those plants, the better it is for the plants, the better it is for humans. These plants are heavy, they're substantial size, so you don't want to be bending over more than you have to. You only get so many lifts in your life. And so we really value that. We look at that critically when we have to move a plant.
I think that it's become masters of logistics.
Yeah, I feel like I would have been better suited in some ways to get a warehouse degree than a horticulture degree, just to understand all the shipping and handling and logistics of this business. It's insane. We have a fleet of 5 trucks that make multiple stops throughout a day, throughout a week. I don't handle that, but I get involved on some scale because I help load the trucks, and it's really complicated knowing how this all gets managed. And I work on a small microcosm of that in the propagation world, right? That plants moving from greenhouse to greenhouse, from bench to bench, all that handling and making sure we've got space. It's a lot of square footage calculations. I hate math, but I do a lot of it. Math is more important in my life than I care to admit.
Well, a lot of people don't realize, too, that even putting things on a truck make a difference because it has to come off the way you're delivering it. I remember in the floral industry, the guy's truck was so meticulously packed because he had to get out certain packages at this stop. And if he had to go rummaging through the whole truck, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah. Listen, one of our locations is 12 acres. If they drive one side of 12 acres and back to the other side when they could have just done, one loop, it's important. So we have a really great software program that we use that helps us with that sort of stuff. So good software,
Yeah, that's important. People should hear that because a lot of people don't even think about that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, we'd like to ask what your favorite genus is. What's your favorite species? What's your favorite cultivar? What's your favorite tree?
Yeah, I can answer that in one word, Franklinia. Franklinia is my absolute favorite, and it's kind of an odd pick because it's native, but it's not native to my region. It's native, but it's not super useful in the environment. So why this tree? The answer is because of the story behind it. William and John Bartram discovered the tree in the 1800s, collected some seed from it and propagated it on their property and sent some seed out to the various people. They were in the business of discovering plants and then selling that plant material on. And then they went back a number of years later and the plant was gone in the wild. So if it wasn't for their efforts as horticulturalists, this plant would be extinct to humans. It would only exist in color paintings that they had done at the time of seeing it. So the reason I really love that plant is because it's a story of plant preservation through human efforts. They got there right at the correct time to preserve a very unique, beautiful tree that would not exist in our world if it wasn't for them. So am I trying to be William and John Bartram? Not necessarily, but I think that like many other horticulturalists, really important to make sure plants preserve and exist in this world. Without our efforts, so many more plants would be gone. And as I said earlier, diversity is so important in our plant world. And without people trying to make diversity happen and preserving plants, we could be in a really scary situation in our world.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of a word game there too. That's a beautiful thing that you shared, but instead of saying plant preservation through human efforts, we could say planet preservation through human efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what you said is spot on, that it's really important that there's people like William and John Bartram out there that are doing that sort of hard work. They do that hard work of finding the plant and bringing it out. And then it's my job to propagate it and get even more of them out there, right? So I'm on their team. And I was happy to say these past 2 years, we had a Franklinia crop that I propagated. I collected the seed, cleaned the seed, propagated it, and got one in my backyard. So
wow,
I'm a very small part of that story now.
Amazing. That's a lovely story. And are they working out as a riparian plant?
No. So there are a segment of plants we grow at Octoraro that we call craft plants, that they're really more for ornamental purpose.
Okay.
And I'm driving that pretty hard, that I want to see some of these ornamental plants out there.
Yeah.
Franklinia, I don't think will ever be a riparian buffer plant again. Once upon a time, maybe it was found on the banks of the Altamaha River. Yeah. But no, I don't think it's a riparian buffer species any longer. It's more of a specimen plant in Kevin's backyard species.
And for others that want it in their backyard, what can you tell our listeners about siting it?
Good luck.
Fingers crossed.
No, there is some great advice out there on siting it. Despite it being fairly hardy, it can be finicky in the winter. So a microclimate somewhere that's a little warmer, that doesn't get extremely hot, doesn't get extremely cold. So somewhere on like the southeast side of your house might be a good nook cranny. Somewhere that stays consistently moist, not real wet. They don't want to be in a bog, but they don't want to dry out either. So you could help that out with a hose too. And I would encourage people not to get discouraged, because it can be finicky. And the first couple of times you plant it, it may not work out for you. But there are some plants that are pushing 100 years old. I know Arnold Arboretum used to have a very old one. Longwood Gardens has some old ones. Bartram Garden has some old ones. Stoneleigh Gardens has a huge old one. So they can get pretty old. Actually, North Creek Nursery has one in their example garden that has to be 50 plus years old at this point. One of the things I think people get wrong about Franklinia is I don't think it's a tree. I think it's a multi-stem suckering shrub.
That's exactly right.
People grow it as a tree, but it really wants to be grown in such a way that it has a rambling habit, that it wants to layer into the ground over time, and the original plant perishes. So that's a nursery problem, though. People produce it as a tree, stake it as a tree, and then it dies as a tree. But if you grew it as a shrub and it suckered, it would be a different story. So my tree in my backyard is not staked. It's all sorts of wonky. It looks out of shape, but I think it will live longer in that condition.
I have that in my shrub book.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. And you know who its favorite companion is? Pawpaw.
Pycnia? Pawpaw. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. It was observed in the wild with Pycnia.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. I'm just so thrilled that you have landed at a place where you are really doing great things for our region, and the people that come to see you just love what you're producing. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people who are in the business should really check out Octoraro. If you have never been, you should go. Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I invite people to reach out to me. We occasionally will do tours. Like Eva was fortunate. How we'd love to have you come and do a tour with us at some point. But feel free to leave my information out there for people to reach out to me. And Eva and Hal, thank you so much for having me. This was a real blast.
We loved it, Kevin, and wax those skis.
Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get out there. Early snowfall in the Poconos looking good for the season. So appreciate it, guys. All right, take care, guys.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Since the airing of this podcast, Kevin and his wife, Claire, have purchased Octoraro Nursery. Congratulations to the both of you. The Plant a Trillion Trees podcast is edited by Andromeda and Recordings in Hollywood, California.